G'day and welcome back to my channel. Now, the more astute of you will have noticed, the Varyag has got a few new things. Yes, we're sporting some funnels now, and there are a lot of air vents. In fact, I've made 23 air vents. Here's a quick pic. Yes, I've made all of those, and these are just the larger ones, so I can dry fit them in and show you how it's coming along. So it's starting to really look ship shape, and I'm pretty happy with that. Now, there has been some other work. All the decks have been finally cemented into the hulls, and I got rid of all the gaps. There's a pic. So that wasn't that hard. It just took a few rubber bands and a bit of careful, careful fiffing around. I don't know. Put your teeth in, Harry. One area here that I had concerns about in the last video, which was this bit of deck here joining down, because there was the veneer under here, the veneer up here, and layers of paint, and this whole thing had pushed up about 1 millimetre. Well, I solved that. I cut in to the deck underneath, the veneer. I also scribed out the plank lines, which were causing a bit of a raise, and I gently sanded a little bit off the bulkhead here. All in all, that managed to get it down so it was level with the rest of the gunwales here. So that's all good. That's come together well. Pretty happy there. Now, one thing I missed was at the stern, and I'll show some overlay pics here. At the stern in that Admiral's Walk, which if you've seen the earlier videos, I put on early in the piece because the hull sides were moulded with the little sticky out bit, what I call the little penile extension. And I thought, I'm going to knock that off. You know, anything that pokes out, I will knock off. In fact, you'll notice at the moment, with the guns, there's no barrels. Yes, that's because I didn't glue the barrels on. I just dry fitted them. And the reason being, again, I know I knock things off. I'm such a fumble fingers. So the barrels were all removed while I could work on everything else. And the barrels be one of the last thing that goes in. In fact, the next stage in the instructions, I should be putting in the guns along here. Oops, see, look, there you go. There's Mr. Fumble Figures already. Everything here is just dry fitted for the superstructure and the funnels. But anyhow, back to that, the Admiral's Walk at the back. So I put that in, and I added a bit of plastic to protect the little penile extension. But of course, I'd failed to paint the little brown area, same as in here. There's the decks, the little minor decks are all brown. And I'd failed to paint that before and then mask it up before spraying the hull white. So I had a dilemma. Here was this tiny little spot, and there's no way my fat fingers can get in there with a brush. And I thought, what am I going to do? So I came up with a solution, and what I did was I created a little mask by templating off the top of the Admiral's Walk. And then that little mask I cut to shape and put on some paper. And then I cut that out from the paper, and then I kept adjusting it and trimming it until that whole shape fitted inside the little walkway there perfectly. Then I just painted that brown and glued it in with a little bit of PVA white wood glue. Problem solved. Yes, the Admiral's Walk is now looking very nice. So that was that. That was all those things. And so what I'm going to do and explore in this video is what I've been doing here with all these funnels and air vents. So first, let's look at the fun I went through with these funnels. It's time for fun with funnels, although, tell you what, it wasn't much fun as I thought it'd be. Now, I have managed to smooth up quite a few of these. You'll notice on their bottoms they actually say who they are. Yep, there we go, that wrecked my beautiful display. I've done that because they are all sort of different sizes and they fit in different spots, and you'd hate to get your funnels rooted up. But as it is, A and D only fit where they're going to go. B and C are about the only two that are interchangeable, but still, I label them. Now that's the underside, that's underneath. Don't you love the little fine vent thing here? It's a lovely little part, that one. It's a nice bit of moulding. This gets interesting in that you get some parts that are beautifully moulded, and they're lovely, you know, and they fit. And then you get funnels. Well, actually, they're nicely moulded. There's nothing wrong with the funnels. The ladders on them are not overdone, really. They'd only look marginally better with photo etch. The ribbing and the detail and the piping. I thought, gee, it's all good. So I didn't race out and I didn't buy the Edward upgrade kit, which if you had the Edward upgrade kit, you just sand everything off. You sand your funnels nice and smooth, and then you've got PE ladders and the PE ribs and everything to put on. Life's a lot easier. But no, I've gone the hard way as usual. Okay, now what the beef is. Okay, so here's a funnel I haven't tied it up. And what's happened is they don't join very well. The half horseshoes don't quite line up, and it takes a lot of fiddling and faffing around until you get them reasonable, and you think you've got them lined up on one side when you're gluing, and then the other side they pop out, and so on. And then when it comes to tidying them up, well, I thought I'd try and get in with a file or something, but gee, it's hard work trying to get in with a file there and cutting everything off and mucking around. It proved too dangerous. In the end, the fastest method, so I'll skip to what was the easiest method, was go back to an old trick I used to use, which is use a knife to scrape. And a lot of you, I notice I've seen your videos, you do this a lot anyway. I tend to use my files and my sanding sticks and those sort of things to do a lot of stuff, because that's easy for me, saves it, especially if I'm on a day where I'm wobbling. And waffling. Am I waffling? I'm always waffling. Anyhow, the easiest method I found then was to cope with this, was to give it a scrape. And by having it on the mat, I can not worry about my hand shaking if it's in sort of one of its bad days. I can apply a bit of pressure to the mat, and then the old trick of, make sure you're nice and level. Now, the beautiful part with the scrape is you're working to the profile, So, I'm going to scrape it out. So over here, I'd actually start, I'll clean that up so you can see what I'm doing. I'd actually score a little line. So I'll break the bead of the ridge, and then I can actually use my knife in there and come out. Now, you'll start to see what the problem is. Do you see that although I've scraped, there's a section in the middle there. Actually, it's not as pronounced on this one. This must be the good side. We'll see it when we go over here. But anyhow, you can see it there. When I've scraped, there's a section in the middle that didn't even get touched by the scraper. And this is what happened on all the other funnels, which meant filing and sanding was proving to be a real nightmare. And trying to get the sander in there and between all the ribs was too hard. So you've really got to scrape down quite a bit or fill. And I chose not to fill. I decided I'd keep scraping to get the trough out. So literally you're tearing out bits on either side here. Now let's keep going. I'll scrape all this up, and I'll use the same method. When I come to the edge of a rib, I'll push hard and I'll scrape across, and by cutting in on the edge of the rib, I've got a point to flick out from. Now notice I'm working generally from the outside to the middle, although here, because there's actually a hole there, so I can actually go that way because I'm going to fall into the hole. If I was going this way, I'd probably be wrecking the rib, so I generally work from the rib away. So, All right, I'll get that done now. I'll scrape all the way through, and then we'll take it to the next stage. Now that I've got the worst of the little trough and ridges in there scraped out, and that's given me a fairly smooth funnel. My method of scoring and then dragging out has at least preserved the ribs, and I haven't wrecked them. But it leaves a little bit of gunk in there, and often you've got a little bit of cut where you've been dragging from. Well, that's fairly easy to remove with the knife perpendicular this time to the band. And again, I need to rest this hard. I can't do things in the air. My hands wobble too much. So hopefully you can see this, but believe me, there's a lot of gunk there. And by gently scraping and then using my trusty toothbrush. Toothbrush is very handy for something like this. You can see what's going on, so you can see, and that's fixed that side, and then on this side, same thing. I'll get in and that's not too bad. And the final touch up then would be, this is where I would bring the sponge in, because I'll need to sand both the ribs, because there's still a little bump on the rib. I've left that there until this point, because now I want to get in and sand, and I'll probably end up sanding the ridge. Well, I will. I'll end up sanding that little rib as well. That's okay, because I've left that little bump on there. So as best as I can now get a little bit of sanding done. And that isn't too bad. Oh, there's another little edge there that I've missed. I don't know if it's showing up on camera, but there are tiny little bits of stray plastic when you're rubbing in one direction with your knife. Believe me, that does work. So there, I've preserved the little ribs. They're not wrecked, and I've managed to get everything else fairly smooth. Now this process, by the time I've finished fighting around, because I'll go off camera and I'll do a bit more, because I really need to look closely, because I'll continue just to give them a little bit of a scrape and tidy them up. This whole process takes about half an hour for each funnel. So you begin to wonder if you shouldn't have spent the money on the photo etch, and then you could have just sanded these all round, with a sanding block, and then stuck on the PE. But horses for courses, and there's just, more than one way to skin a cat. Oops, sorry, Basque. But I've gone this way, and, it's not too bad. If you've got a method, and again, it took me the first funnel to figure out the method. Once I realised trying to use files, all the other ways just wasn't working, and actually just lay it down on the mat so I had something to purchase and then scrape. Now this worked for me because anything I hold in my hand up in the air, I'll always wobble. It's very rare I'll do any trimming in the air because it's a mess and I'll end up cutting myself. But if I've got something to lean against, I do so much better. And maybe that's a bit of a hint and a tip for you. Works for me, and I get a result. So I'll get this funnel finished, and then we'll move on, and we might do the air vents. Small parts like these air vents can really test my patience, and these tiny ones were a challenge to get off the sprue, but luckily it was only one sprue point, and with a little bit of careful cutting with a knife and a little bit of sanding, you can get there. Now, I thought I'd show you. I've got a method, and it always works for me. Gets me around these problems. So here's one I have just glued together. What you'll see is I've left the little sprue joint, a tiny bit of it on there, on both sides. And I've sort of talked about this before in my videos. It's my method. If I'm dealing with a round or a curved surface, this I don't cut those off entirely when I'm cementing. I make sure the halves will mate flush, and then that allows me to slide them together and try and get them mating up as round as possible. I mean, these ones at least went together a lot better than those bloody funnels. Those funnels trying to get the round to join and line up, well, that wasn't possible. So a lot more sanding on those funnels. But for these, they lined up fairly well. And my method for that is there's a couple of little tabs and holes in there. Well, I glue those first. I put a little bit of glue on those first, tap the thing together, and then using my tweezers, I'll give it a squeeze. And especially along the seam line, which you can't see, there's actually a seam line there. It's actually not a bad glue job on that one, because the seam line is so good. Because what I did was, once it was on there, and it was just basically the two little tabs holding together, is I used the tweezers literally across the seam line to make sure the two halves lined up. So that seam line goes that way, so actually I tapped across the seam line like that. Didn't squeeze, I just tapped it gently until the two half rounds lined up. So, that would have been just a gentle tap, 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 tap. And that's how I did it. Now you've got to be careful when you're doing that, you don't tap where the little nub is that you haven't cut off, because that'll throw it out, so you've got to work your way around that. Now that allowed me to get these pretty well spot on, get them lining up into a cylinder. And then what I do afterwards is that's when I put the Tamiya thin on the outside, and then I squeeze the two halves again together. Because by now the thing should be tacked and it should be pretty well lined up. Now that gives me almost a perfect finish. I mean, you just about get away with that side. Whack a coat of paint on that, Just looks like it's got a little bit of salt and spray on it. But this nub now has to come off. So let's remove that now, and also the one here, which is a bit more tricky because it's across the top of this, and you've got to be very careful with these little fine frilly little bits. So I'll do that now, and then you can see my simple way of just coping with this. So when it comes to these little fine parts, and as I did on the funnel, a lot of the time knife is all you need. You really, a file is going to be too hard to get in there and you'll get flat spots. So basically using the knife, and what I also found, here's a bit of a top tip, don't use a brand new sharp knife, because often it's so sharp that you'll just cut in and you'll make a wreck of it. If it's a little bit blunt, you can give it a bit of a push, and because it's not cutting that hard, it's actually going to have a much duller effect. Now normally that wouldn't be a good idea, but here actually it is, because I tell you what, I had the sharp knife in when I was first doing the funnels, and I was about cut bloody holes in them, and I remembered, grab one of my old knives, it's a little bit dull, and it actually allows you to give it, you can actually run the knife over, because it's not super sharp, it's not digging holes, you're just cutting tops off, because that's all you want. And then you can do the old scrapey trick. Okay, so that's nearly there. And you always work from the centre out, like you don't try and start at one side and go right across the other side, because if you do that, you'll dig in there, and when you go to the other side, you'll rip it off. Whereas if you start sort of in the centre, gently, and then give it a bit of a flip, that for me always works a lot better. There's a lot of reasons for that, because you're starting gently, and you'll end gently. Whereas you sort of go from one end to the other, and you tend to get a bit more sort of ferocious as you go along. All right, that's not looking too bad. Oops, off camera, sorry. That's not looking too bad. So again, it's all about scraping. And that's got the worst of that off. Now I can come in with my sanding sponge, which I've lost, it's over here. Now my little sanding sponge, which is good because it can conform to any kind of strange angle. And I've pretty well got that done. There's a point where you have to stop sanding, because you can sand and sand and sand. I mean, it's never going to be perfect. It's a model. It's plastic. So you sort of get to a point and you go, yep, is that, look at the profile. And the only thing I've got is a little bit of a dent there, which is annoying. How do I manage that? Again, it's all about being gentle and not doing too much. You know, it's like handling a snake. Yes. Well, I don't know. I can handle a lot of snakes in my time. But anyhow, that's got that part done. And that was fairly easy. And notice when I first started, I had it on the cutting mat. Especially with a small part, that's the way I go, because I can only get one finger on to hold it in place. So similarly, now to do the that join down there, which is looking pretty good, I'm just going to run the knife down gently at a few different angles across that joint and see what I've got. I'll probably have to block camera here. Sorry. Okay, so that's actually not too bad. So that didn't require much at all because of the way I did it, where I lined it up as best I could with the squeezing the tweezers. And then it's just a matter of a bit of light sanding. And again, my sponges are great for all this sort of stuff. Look at that, that's done. And again, on this side, when I'm doing the scraping, I'll try and rest it on something, because again, my hands can wobble, depending on how bad the go it is. Oh, stab yourself. All right, I've got a nub there to remove as well. Now, with this nub, and what I'll do with cylinders, is I'll lay the knife flat, basically horizontal to the cutting board, and I'll rotate the cylinder and cut. Now this should hopefully stop me from creating a big hole, because I'm only cutting to the profile of the cylinder. Alright, so then I can eyeball it, go, yep, it's not too bad. Now the thing is, what it tends to do is cut it perfectly at the side where the knife goes in, but then it comes up. So you've got to go back the other way. And this is all gentle stuff. You're taking off tiniest bits of plastic. After a while, you feel nothing is coming off because you're scraping along the profile and it's just no resistance at all. And you've got it. That's it. Again, a bit of a gentle sand. Good old sanding sponges. At least I could get into the damn thing on this. Couldn't do that in the funnel. Bloody hard to use sanding sponge funnel. And there we go. That's it. And that's done. Now, for the tiny little buggers, for these minute or even smaller, for these ones, they went halves. They were actually a single piece. So let's move these that way. These were a single piece, and they had a sprue point. Now again, I use the same method for cleaning, and they're very hard to sand. But what I did at the end, and this is an old trick, many of you might know this, is at the very end when I've got it pretty well there, use my Tamiya thin cement, and I actually run the cement over the final work, even with all the sanding, filing in there. And that will actually pretty well sand it all out. And then with a bit of luck, I won't sand it, it'll smooth it all out. What are you saying, Harry? Talking crap as usual. And then a little bit of a gentle, once that's set, because it's so hard to hold, and I can't, my fat fingers, I can't hold things like this size. And you can see, it's all about a bit of patience and about being gentle. Two qualities I find very hard. So there's that one. That one's looking quite nice now. Okay, so put it over here in the done pile, along with that one. They're pretty smooth. So that use of the Tamiya thin, it's an old trick. Well, as old as used to do it with any old glue, but Tamiya thin works even better because it dries so quickly, at least for me. And its capillary action means it runs everywhere. But why that's happening is it takes all the dust. Like you've been sanding away, but there will be lumps and there will be troughs, and it's too small for you to really get in there. So, or you've been scraping away. What the Tamiya thin does is the dust will settle in the troughs, and as you run your Tamiya thin or your glue over it, it'll scrape the peaks where the dust is sitting up, pops in the troughs, and literally levels everything out. And then the whole thing self-levels anyway because of the capillary action of the glue, and you end up with a smoother cylinder. It's a neat little trick if you can master it. Anyway, I'll keep going on because I've got a whole lot more of these to do. The only ones I need a filler on actually were the large ones. These are the largest ones. They, as best as I could put them together, they end up with a little sinkhole here. Just a tiny little sinkhole. So as much as I could sand them up, and again I used exactly the same method there. Exactly the same. I pinned them, glued them, squeezed them with the tweezers until I got the halves together, and then I put Tamiya thin on the end, and then I came back and just with a knife scraped and a light sand. And then the only part I had to put a little bit of Mr. Surfacer in there to fill was the little sinkhole there. And that's it. So there's quite a lot of funnels, or not funnels, little air vents. It's only 4 funnels. But that's how I've managed to get them all done. Now that all my air vents and funnels have all been cleaned up and they're ready for painting. And the reason I chose to do funnels and air vents, even though they're in different parts of instructions, in fact I've jumped all over the instructions to pull these parts out, is because they're all yellow. See if you have a look at the drawing at the back there. They're yellow. The air vents are yellow too in the version I'm doing. The funnels do have black on the top and the air vents do have red inside. But predominantly they're a yellow part. So I'm going to paint all my yellow stuff in one hit. And quite frankly, I'm at a stage anyway where I can start assembling. And it's with boats, you need to have things painted. I find it very, very hard to paint things when they're actually in place because I will splot and splash it everywhere. So I paint as I go and I build things as I go and make up sub-assemblies, and then when I put them together, they have reasonably crisp edges because they've been painted separately. That's my method. Anyway, that's what I do. The other thing too at this point is before I put in all of this paraphernalia, and before I can finally cement in the superstructure, start adding, searchlights and bits and pieces and railings and everything, what I do need to do is do something with those decks. They're nice. The wood veneer is pretty, but it's not entirely realistic. And what I want to do is do some staining on that and pick out some planks and darken some and other appear light and just give it a bit more of a random look rather than this very uniform sort of look that it is. There is some wood grain in there, but I know from experience that if you run a wash over it, you can enamel wash, as acrylic washes won't quite do the same thing with wood. You need something that's going to soak in, so very much like a varnish wash. But an enamel wash over that wood grain is going to bring it out. And then I've got a few different colour washes that I can basically pick out planks. Now, we'll explore that now while I go off and paint the yellow on those funnels and air vents. And off to the paint booth we went. I put toothpicks in the bottom of all the funnels and the larger vents, so we're drilling a hole in them. Small ones had to go on a little bit of tape. But that worked well, and I covered everything with Steiner's yellow, which is a brilliant base coat. And then I found if I mix parts of one equal of my Hataka yellows, I got this, the correct colour yellow for my funnels. Don't they look great? What a difference some colour makes. Let's look at these lovely funnels now. All nice and yellow, and all my air vents. They've got the little red inserts, and I've dry fitted a few things here. Don't breathe, whatever you do. Everything's pretty well just dry fitted so we could see what the colour palette was going to look like. And I'm pretty happy with that. Now, I had talked about the deck and the deck staining, and I have been doing that. In fact, the stern of the ship has already been stained. But this video has already run on long enough, and I have shot another 20 minutes of the deck staining. And I haven't even edited that up and added all the tops and tails yet. So I think we've got another video in the making for doing the deck staining, because that was quite an involved process. And I'm sure you'd like to see all that in detail. So as long as you've enjoyed this and you haven't been fully bored by me just scraping, sanding and painting my funnels and my vents, I hope you'll stay around for the next video. But there you go. That's the Varyag, and she's looking pretty smart. I mean, I'm loving the green lower hull and the white side of the hull, and then up through, and the brown in the sort of the little deck areas, and you know, the grey of the guns and the yellow of the funnel. I mean, there's just so many colours going on. It's really is a pretty ship. So there you go. It will get some weathering. There will be some washes and some things added to dull that prettiness down. But essentially, those are the colours that she's going to be. So that's it. So we'll call it quits for this video. And in a few days, it won't take that long, I'll have the video up about the deck staining. So that's it for now. It's goodbye from Australia, and it's hooroo from Harry Houdini.